first started playing Magic, I could not figure out why this land was worth $600. So today, we're gonna find out. Now, the cost of lands or cards in general can be broken down into what I like to call the 3 A's. The advantages of a specific card, the abilities of the card, and what is the availability of the card, or rarity to use that vernacular. Now for this video, we're going to look at 3 different lands that tap for 2 different kinds of mana, blue and black. We have Underground Sea, which is $700 for a used one, Watery Grave, which is $13 at time of recording, and Contaminated Aquifer. So we're going to break down the advantages or disadvantages of each of these cards. Now the reason why lands specifically can be a little bit more expensive is because lands don't have a mana cost. So if a land has an ability that creates a stupid board state, say Gaia's Cradle for instance, basically you can use that immediately. You can create a board state that does the same thing as Gaia's Cradle, but it's going to take longer. Now looking at the 3 cards that we have in an example, you can see some similarities and differences. The similarities is that they all tap for blue black. However, the primary difference between them is speed. So Contaminated Aquifer enters the battlefield tapped, which means you can use it next turn, but you can't use it right now. Watery Grave, on the other hand, only enters the battlefield untapped if you pay 2 life, so there's still a penalty involved, and Underground Sea enters the battlefield untapped, ready to use instantly. Now if you're playing more casually, that difference may not seem like a big deal, and it really isn't if you run a casual game. However, if you're playing competitively, that difference of having to use that mana next turn can be the difference of having a response to something, or just being able to win or lose. It gets that tedious. Now, eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that all 3 of these lands are both the island and the swamp land types. This means that they are viable targets for the fetch lands. So we're going to use an example of, let's say you have a Vampiric Tutor in your hand that you want to cast, but you don't have a swamp mana to cast it with. Well, if you have a Misty Rainforest, you can go grab any of these 3 cards, but you're still beholden to either the penalties or if the land enters tapped or untapped. So if it's your opponent's turn and you want to cast that Vampiric Tutor, you need to grab either an Underground Sea or a Watery Grave, and then you can use it immediately. However, if you grab the Contaminated Aquifer, you still have to do it next turn, which kind of defeats the purpose of having the tutor on someone else's turn. Now this is a quick example, however, this kind of highlights how speed can be a really crucial factor whenever it comes to competitive play or even just casual play. Now the third factor is availability, which is quite possibly the greatest determinant of price, and this is also where we get to mention the reserved list. Now the reserved list is a list of cards that will never be reprinted again. Of the 3 cards that we mentioned, Underground Sea is the only one that is on this list, and Underground Sea was also printed in alpha and beta, I believe, making it one of the oldest cards in the game, and it will never be reprinted again, making this card both sought after by collectors, but since it's also tournament legal, competitive players as well. Now with Underground Sea being on the reserve list, that is why Underground Sea is so stupidly expensive. Both Watery Grave and Contaminated Aquifer do get reprinted more often. Now Watery Grave still gets reprinted much more rare, which is why it's more pricey. I believe it's only been reprinted about 3 or 4 times, and Contaminated Aquifer gets reprinted about once every year or so. So just keep in mind the different reprint rates of different cards is probably one of the biggest determinants of price in the game. And a lot of the concepts that we just talked about can be applied to different cards in the game, such as the differences between darkness and fog. However, these are just kind of things to keep in mind whenever you're building your deck, because if you're building your deck to be a little bit more casual, you don't need Watery Grave or Underground Sea. Contaminated Aquifer is probably going to be overkill in general. Typically, Watery Grave is kind of like my cutoff for a higher level deck. And if you like this video, make sure to check out my other Magic the Gathering content. There's a lot of it. However, thank you so much for watching, and we'll learn something new in the next video.